Particles can be instructed to bounce or deflect off surfaces by adding a special type of space warp to a scene called a deflector. This video will show you how that's done. Using a file named Deflector Space Warp, let's see what we can do. You can find the file in the Working Files folder for this chapter. Let's start by playing back our animation. You can do that using the playback arrow in the lower right-hand corner or by simply typing the / on your keyboard. As set up, I've already created a gravity space warp that's been bound to the scene's superspray particle system. The strength on the gravity has been adjusted to a level that has the particles from the superspray arcing into the direction of and going through the blue box on the left-hand side of the screen. Our goal will be to see if we can't have the particles collide with and bounce off the box. Now, before we set up our deflection device, let's change the particle spray a bit so we can better see our particles. Selecting the superspray icon, we'll head over into the Modify column. In the modifier stack, we'll drop below the gravitation space warp binding, selecting superspray. Under Viewport Display, let's change the setting from Ticks to Mesh. We'll then drop a little farther down into the particle generation category, changing the particle size to 5. Okay, let's see what we have as far as particle shapes. For that, we'll open up the Particle Type tab. Under Standard Particles, let's change from the default triangle over to cubes. We've also got the tetra shape, which is ideal for creating water effects. Maybe for something like a fountain, hose, or possibly a faucet. After looking that over, let's settle in on using spheres. Now, if we play things back, you'll see how the display appears a little choppy. The reason for that is right now we've got quite a bit of stuff that we're cramming down Max's throat. Not just the number of particles, but the fact that we're running our scene in both shaded mode and have our shadows turned on. Now that's quite a bit to ask. Why don't we see if we can't optimize just a few things? As far as the viewport display, we'll go to the upper left-hand corner, clicking on Realistic. From the menu, we'll then choose Lighting and Shadows, then Turn Off Shadows. As far as for the actual particles, let's change the amount that's being emitted per frame. In the particle generation category, we'll change our use rate from 15 to 10. Now to quickly jump to that category, I'll simply right-click in the right-hand column. When the menu opens, I'll choose Particle Generation. With our particle use rate currently set at 15, Max has been instructed to generate 15 spheres at each and every frame. To lighten the load just a little bit, we'll change that use rate to 10. Let's also see what our viewport display percentage is set at. Under Viewport Display, let's change our percentage of particles from 100 down to 50%. Okay, having made those adjustments, let's play our animation again. With that, I think our settings are now a little easier on the system. 3ds Max offers a nice selection of deflecting type space warps, each with its special applications and each with its individualized set of controls. Let's take a look at what's offered. Back in the Create column, we'll click on the Space Warps tab. It's over on the right. The icon looks like 3 wavy lines. In the Space Warp category section, we'll choose Deflectors. From the list, we've got 3 kind of old-school choices. Those are the deflector, the S deflector, and the U deflector. The deflector is designed to simply be a flat, square-shaped deflector. The S deflector works the same way, but is spherically shaped. That's where the S at the front of its name comes from. And the U deflector is kind of neat, as it allows you to pick an object from your scene as the deflecting surface. I'll go ahead and delete all 3 of those from the field of play. Now, the newer boys in the block are the OmniFlect deflectors. They work pretty much the same way as their old school counterparts, but they offer a few more updated options and controls that can be used to fine-tune the deflection effect. For our example, let's use the OmniFlect version that allows us to pick something in the scene as our deflecting surface. That would be the U-OmniFlect. Let's go ahead and create one at the bottom center of our view. If we scrub the timeline, the scene will reveal that there's still no deflecting effect. And that should make sense, being that we've yet to bind the space warp back to our particle-emitting superspray. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll select the superspray, then go to the Bind to Space Warp icon. With our cursor now back in line with the superspray, we'll drag a connection back to the deflector. Now there's still one more thing we'll have to do. Back on the U-OmniFlect, we'll have to select the blue box as our deflecting device. In the Modify column, directly below the stack, we'll click where it says Pick Object. We'll then go into our view, clicking on the blue box. Now after doing that, let's go back to the right-hand side and verify that it's the box that's now been determined as being the deflecting device. Okay, let's go ahead now and grab our time slider, scrubbing from right to left. As we get past frame 100 though, it looks like the deflecting effect is only lasting for so long. Let's get into the U-OmniFlect settings and see if we can't figure out why. In the Modify column, in the Timing category, notice the time off value is set to 100. This basically meaning that the deflection effect will cease at the 100th frame. Having 200 frames down on our timeline, let's change the time off to 200. Playing things back, we've now fixed the problem. Okay, back in our scene, why don't we flatten out the box a bit so we can better see the reaction of the particle's bounce. The bounce value in the OmniFlect controls determine just how much or how little the objects bounce. The higher the number, the more of a Super Ball type bounce we'll get. Let's start by playing things back at the default bounce value of 1. Let's compare that to using a bounce of 1.5. Let's see how things would look if we took the bounce to 2. Now we're really seeing the effect of the increased bounce value. Let's take that setting back to the default number of 1. If we opted to use instead a lower value, we'd create less of a bouncing effect. Let's see how things would look using a bounce value of 0.5. And why don't we compare that to a bounce setting of 0.3? You can also add in a little friction, so when the particles hit the surface, they have more of a grabbing effect. Kind of like sliding up against a piece of sandpaper versus simply sliding across a piece of ice. Leaving the bounce at 0.3, let's try a friction of 25%. As you can see, the superspray particles are now grabbing a little tighter onto the surface they're sliding up against. Let's see how that would compare to using a friction of 50%. And we'll try one more at a little higher still. Let's see how 85% would look. With that amount of grab, watch the way things look if we re-rotate the box back to its original orientation. Now the particles grab and slowly drip down the front edge of the box. Now, one last thing here. I mentioned in a previous video that you could actually use your own geometry in a particle effect, choosing something in your scene as the particle object. See the teapot in the upper right-hand corner of the view? Let's use that instead of the sphere as our particle shape. He's been hanging around up there with nothing to do. Let's put him to work. We'll reselect the super spray, heading back to the right-hand column. We'll head down to the particle type category, choosing this time instanced geometry. A couple of inches below that, in the instancing parameters category, under object, we'll click on the button that says Pick Object. That'll be our ticket to now selecting the teapot in the viewport. Now, once the particle's been initiated, you'll see the teapots are rather large in size. Heading back to the particle generation category, let's change the size of our particle from 5 down to 2. Now, we've got quite a bit of geometry here. Let's change our display settings to using a lighter weight bounding box. Back in the general parameters, under Viewport Display, we'll turn on B-Box. Because of all the lines that's generating on the screen, let's take our percentage of display down to 10. If we now play things back, you'll see how much easier it is playing back the bounding boxes than it is the teapot geometry. If we render though, rest assured we'll still see all of our teapots. So that's what's up with using particle deflectors. If you've got particles in a scene, chances are probably pretty good that sooner or later you're going to find something to have that particle deflect off of. Remember those deflector space warps and be sure to put them in where needed. I'm going to go ahead and save the scene out as deflector space warp completed if you'd like to take a look.